Welcome to the Let's Talk series. The Let's Talk series is a 30-minute video discussion between Dr. Becca, Dr. Amanda, and a local practitioner who understands pelvic health on topics pertaining to women's health and wellness. This series was created to help women navigate their pelvic health wherever they are on the path of womanhood, to advocate, navigate, and collaborate together with a holistic team of allies. Pelvic health healing is multidimensional, and the best outcomes occur with a team-based approach. We invite you to tune into our monthly series to learn more about your pelvic health and engage with our community partners. So today, welcome to Maggie Lancioni. Today, we will be discussing mental health in general, but mostly as it relates to kind of postpartum and peripartum anxiety, depression, and mood disorders. So Maggie is... Let me pull it up. Maggie is a licensed professional counselor in the state of New Jersey who focuses on women's mental health. She is trained in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, cognitive behavioral therapy, and dialectical behavioral therapy. She's very passionate about helping women, specifically those who are trying to become pregnant, who are pregnant or are postpartum. She believes that there's just such a lack of maternal mental health care when it is so needed and deserved. So she's very honored to be able to do this work with this population, and we are very honored to have you as one of our partners in this community. So welcome, Maggie.
Hi, I feel like it's been a long time coming. Yeah. How many times we've had a conversation of like,
yeah.
So I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you for my introduction, Becca. I appreciate it. So like before I jump into everything, I do have like two little disclaimers at the start. The first one is that you're going to hear me say women, birthing people, pregnant individuals, pregnant people, parenthood. You're going to hear me kind of use these languages a little interchangeably, because I think the first thing is it's really important to recognize that not everybody who is pregnant or has a baby identifies as a woman. So I think that is something just important to recognize, that you'll hear me kind of use that language interchangeably. And then the second thing is, a lot of this information is a little bit daunting. It can seem really scary. And so what I want to say is, you're going to hear me say this intermittently throughout just our discussion, is you can get better. So it might seem really scary, and it is, and it can be, just with the caveat, and to remember that it doesn't always have to feel that way. It doesn't always have to feel so scary, and that there are treatments and there is support, and you can get better and you can heal. So that's like the first things before I kind of jump in. So yes, of course. And we'll talk about all that towards the end, is like, how to get the support that you need and deserve. So the first thing is what the heck is perinatal? A lot of people, when they hear that, they're like, I don't know what that means. Is that just all like postpartum? So perinatal is really just like a time frame. It's from conception all the way throughout your first year postpartum. So what that does is it takes into consideration like the fluctuation of your hormones throughout all of pregnancy, takes into account post-birth, lactation, weaning, and then the reemergence of your menstrual cycle. Because there's so much that happens other than just like, I get pregnant, I have a baby. Like there's so many things, There's so many things that happen. Like people don't recognize the intensity of lactation. And then when you're done, like breastfeeding, if that's what you choose to do, and how at least from myself personally, that was shocking. When I finished breastfeeding, I was like, whoa, I did not anticipate this fluctuation of hormones. So that's what perinatal is. It takes into account from conception all the way through the first year of postpartum. And then, so that's PMAD, perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So the mood portion is depression, bipolar, and psychosis. But just for sake of time, I'm going to really just kind of be talking about depression. And then the anxiety piece is generalized anxiety, panic, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And then there's also, this is also, I believe included in there is like the trauma piece, the PTSD piece of labor, delivery, birth, postpartum, all of that. One other thing, I have a lot of information. So if you ever have questions, comments, concerns, just be like, yo, hold on, whoa, slow down. So just please interrupt me at any time if I'm just like spewing things, because I tend to get excited, as you were saying.
In
my little intro, you're like, she's excited. That's like an understatement.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it's going to be super helpful for a lot of the population that we see, because we do see postpartum women, and I love how you're talking about the perinatal time frame that covers the whole first year, because I think so
Yes.
often people are like 6 weeks, like, all right, we're
100%.
good.
And no longer pregnant or
Right.
perinatal.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like, we can get on that soapbox and stand on it forever of like how long the postpartum like healing process really takes, taking into account like all the hormone fluctuations and everything like that. So I think it's super important for people to recognize that like at 6 weeks postpartum, you're not there should be
there's not like a pass go.
Right. Yeah.
If only.
Like
if only it was like
down on themselves if they're
right.
Yeah. So
right. And we're going to talk about that as well, as that like 6-week postpartum checkup, and just how, there's a lot of, it's just not necessarily accurate for a lot of people that it's 6 weeks that you feel like, life is back to normal as usual. So we'll talk about that, but yes. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that it's from conception. So it's also throughout your entire pregnancy. It's not just postpartum,
Right.
Okay. So just in terms of statistics, so some research says 1 out of 5 to 1 out of 7 women or birthing people struggle from perinatal depression. And that's pretty prevalent, 1 out of every 5 to 1 out of every 7 people. And research indicates that postpartum depression is a universal experience, like around the world. And I think that is also really important to recognize. It's everywhere. So when you think of prenatal screening, like when you are pregnant, you go to the doctor a bunch of times. You get screened for like gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, gestational hypertension, but none of those medical concerns have as high of like a prevalency rate, or they're not as common as PMADs. You're going to hear me say PMADs a lot for postpartum or perinatal mental health disorders, mood and anxiety. And yet we're not screened for those pre-birth. So I find that interesting. And then half of the women or the birthing people or pregnant people with a diagnosis, they don't get the treatment needed. So half the people who do struggle are not getting treatment. And the percentages of all of that kind of goes up for single mothers, single parents, and for those in the LGBTQ plus population. And I think from what I was looking at when I was like really diving deep into this, is that there is way more research that is needed within those populations to get like a better handle on the numbers there. So a really important thing to kind of look at is like the assumptions of motherhood, like thinking, or parenthood, I should say, recognizing that like being a mother comes naturally. Like there's an assumption that because it's in our biology to have babies, because it's in our biology to, breastfeed or chest feed, that we think that we should just be able to do these things without struggling. And I think a lot of that, comes from obviously like the generations before us and the difficulty with talking about mental health in general. There's such a stigma in general around mental health, but also social media, right? Like you see a lot of like the snapback culture, like when you're done being pregnant, your body just, you snap back, you go back to the way that it was before you were pregnant. And then the assumptions and the stigma around, good moms don't take breaks, and good moms don't need help, and good moms can do it all on their own and they never have to ask for help. I don't know if you're familiar with like I've seen it on like shirts and logos on hats and stuff, like strong as a mother, like this, there's just this unfortunate misconception that when you are a parent, when you're a mother in particular, that you should just be able to do it all and not struggle. And then there's also the assumption that all pregnancies are wanted, that all pregnancies equal a live baby, that all pregnancies equal you're in a loving and committed relationship, that all pregnancies equal a healthy baby, that all pregnancies equal fulfillment, right? Because maternal mental health, that matters too. Like just because you're a mom doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy or that you're fulfilled. Like we also have other identities outside of motherhood, which is a whole other topic we could talk about. I'm just like, right. Like that's not all that you are, after you have a baby. Okay. Any questions, comments so far?
No, I think, when you bring up the strong like a mother, like I think there's like the physical strong, and that's what people are like promoting of like you can get stronger. But I think one big thing that I recognize in many different cultures too is that women are able to be strong and only if they're supported, whether that's auntie, mom, grandmom, the village, or mental health practitioners, Becca and I sitting and helping your pelvic floor, going to like all those things. Like that part is, I think, the part that like we need to like raise up more and say like, you're strong when you're supported, and like people
Yes.
like you is what is so necessary. So
yeah. And I really should have made this a disclaimer as well, that a lot of this unfortunately comes from a place of access and privilege. You know, like the ability to get the support that you need for your mental health. I think that's also like, that's a really pivotal, you know, key part of this as well. Because you do need a village, but a lot of people are like, where is my village? Where is everybody that I was told that I needed? You know, I think like back in the day, we used to live more of like a community-based living. Like, you know, everybody in the town kind of did things together, and culturally as well, I think it's different. But, you know, at least from what I see with the clients that I work with, it's like, you know, we don't necessarily, we live in a very like individualistic society, like my family, my stuff, and I'm responsible for that 100%. We don't necessarily have that community support that I think is obviously needed. We're pack animals, you know, we need connection and community, and we don't necessarily have that. Yeah. And Becca, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just thinking too of like when we have a new client who's coming in who's postpartum, and we're asking like, what is your support like at home? Or even like, have you been, you know, speaking with a counselor or a therapist? Because a lot of times they do share with us how overwhelming this whole process is. And I feel like a lot of people will use that word of like overwhelmed or just crazy, or I don't have time, A, B, and C. But I feel like sometimes people like have this notion of like, you have to be like struggling a certain amount in order to be like deserving of support. For people, I'll ask people and they're like, well, you know, like I'm fine. Like I'm not like, I'm, you know, I'm not having like depression or anxiety or that sort of thing. But it's like, it's okay. You don't have to be like at your lowest of lows in order to receive the support. And I feel like it's the same way with people coming to pelvic floor therapy after you know, being pregnant or having a child. It's like, you can just do this to support your body, to support your mind, to support your like emotional, mental health, physical health.
You don't have to be peeing your pants all
you
day,
don't have to hit like a standard of like, oh, well, you have this much like wrong. So now you can come in. Like you can just get support just so you can be happy and healthy.
I say it all the time, just in mental health in general. If you're interested, even if you're thinking about therapy, you're like, oh, I wonder what that's like. Go. Just go. That's what I say. There is no threshold for in fact, what I think, you know, clinically speaking, I would rather you come in before you get to the point where it's that intense and that difficult that you might need more care than just once a week outpatient therapy. I'd rather you come when you're just kind of starting to think about it or you're interested in it, because then we can, you know, be proactive instead of reactive, like that kind of, you know, thought process.
So it's part of so talk into that phase of like the 6-week postpartum visit. Are we actually starting to look at things so we can be proactive, or is that more of a reactive kind of conversation that, you know, people are having?
Right. So, I mean, when you think about like the 6 weeks postpartum visit, typically speaking, you get like one of two screenings when you go there. Well, let me back up actually. You're most likely still on maternity leave if you get it. Again, conversation for another day, because that also is all mental health impacted, how soon you're returning to work, your breastfeeding, chest feeding journey. Okay, pause there. So you go to your 6-week postpartum visit for the most part, and you get, for the most part, a screening. And the two most common ones are like the Edinburgh Depression Scale and then the Patient Health Questionnaire, the PHQ-9. I know that's just jargon. But basically what they do is they screen for depression. They're like self-assessment, like, you know, a scale of 1 to 5, or, you know, and you just look at it and you say somewhat, you know, and they're within, one of them is within the last 7 days. And then the other is to keep frame of reference within the last 2 weeks. So if you're filling them out, it's like, you're feeling like thinking about, okay, when I was 4 weeks postpartum, okay, when I was 5 weeks postpartum, how was I feeling? And the questions are like trouble sleeping, poor appetite, overeating, feeling tired, low energy. And you're like, yes.
Like everyone.
Right. But like, especially like 6 weeks postpartum, you know? So it's hard to decipher or distinguish between like what is, you know, normal postpartum stuff versus like a mood disorder versus like, you know, depression. And the other thing is the screening does not equal treatment. So you can screen it, you can fill it out as accurately as possible, which is another thing, because when you're there at your 6-week postpartum visit, a lot of times the parent has to bring the baby because who is watching this infant for the most part. And you're also in the throes of the postpartum experience. So you're in this room, you might be feeling a whole bunch of which ways, you might be feeling shuffled in and out of a doctor's office. You have to sit down and fill out this very, difficult scale sometimes to look at. And, it's self-report. So you don't necessarily know the accuracy. You don't necessarily know the mindset. There could be a screaming baby in the room. So there's a lot of factors at play there as well. But the screening does not equal treatment. So you can screen, and say, a provider could say, hey, it looks like you might be struggling with X, Y, or Z. But where do you go from there? Like, you can give somebody resources, but how do you know that that person is utilizing those resources? And the other thing is that the peak onset for PMADS is after 3 months postpartum. And yet the checkup for postpartum is 6 weeks. So we're not even really getting like an accurate representation or an accurate assessment of the prevalence of PMADS. So I think that's something important to look at. I was diving deep into the Postpartum Support International stuff yesterday, and it was saying, like, really, technically speaking, it should be like you get seen at 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, like every 3 months throughout your postpartum, journey, to make sure that you get like a more accurate assessment, especially if we see that the peak onset is 3 months, but nobody is seeing you
I feel like
at that point.
Clinically, in the physical therapy part of it, I just saw one of our moms yesterday who's 8 weeks postpartum, and she's like, I'm feeling great. Like, overall, everything's feeling great. But she's yet to step back into her role as a healthcare provider and all the other things that will come within those first 3 months. And I think that's super important, and it makes sense that that's when things peak. And also from a healing perspective, you're in this inflammatory phase in those first 6 to 8 weeks, and then 8 to 20, 24 weeks, if you've had a perineal tear, C-section, that's when like more healing happens. So we can't just think in this very closed mindset of 6 weeks is like your end all be all. So
right. Exactly. It's really tough. And it's actually kind of shocking to me that like it's not different yet. Like, it's shocking to me that like nothing has changed about that. And like, considering I don't know exactly how many like pregnancy visits I had with the doctor. I think it's like, probably like 10 or more that you go to the doctor, and then you're postpartum and you go one time and like, and you're just like, okay, you had your baby, like, and the 6 week appointment is really like, okay, you look like you're hearing nicely, you can go back to regular activity, have sex.
Right.
Like that's basically what it is. And you're like, okay, especially if you're a first time parent, I think like taking all that into consideration.
Yeah.
But okay, so kind of like looking into the diagnoses, I think it's important to recognize that there's a difference between the baby blues and depression. So baby blues is that first like 2-ish weeks postpartum. It affects 60 to 80% of new moms, new parents, universally, just due to like the hormone fluctuation and sleep deprivation. It usually lasts no longer than 2 weeks, and the peak is between 3 to 5 days. So if it lasts longer than the 2 week period, which I believe is relatively common, then you can be diagnosed with postpartum depression. And when you think of the blues, you just think of like tearfulness, exhaustion, being more emotionally reactive, sadness, that kind of stuff. And then you have the anxiety and the OCD piece. So the anxiety prevalence is 15.8% within the postpartum population, and OCD, so perinatal women are at 1.5 to 2 times more greater risk of developing OCD. So what that looks like, obsessive compulsive disorder, what that looks like in the perinatal population is largely like the intrusive thoughts around harm to the baby. So like, oh my God, what if I walk down the steps and trip and fall and the baby falls? Or, oh my gosh, what if I put the onesie on too tight and they suffocate in their sleep? Or, oh my God, what if I'm cutting this banana and somehow the knife slips from my hand and lands on the baby on the floor? Like those kinds of more intrusive thoughts that are unfortunately, they happen within the postpartum population because it's freaking scary, I think, for a lot of us. And then you have the trauma component, which I think is where you two also come into, just in terms of like birthing experiences. But postpartum PTSD. So this is what I find just like so unbelievably interesting. About 45% of women report that their birth was traumatic. That's almost half.
Wow.
Almost half of birthing people consider their birth traumatic. And I just find that extremely interesting. And that is only those who report it, right? It's like, I'm sure that there are a ton who are like, well, I did have a healthy baby, so
It's fine.
I guess it's fine. I guess it's fine, right? And trauma, as we know, changes the brain chemistry, it changes the structure of the brain and the chemistry of the brain. So I'm going to read this off just to get a better idea, to not miss anything. So it impacts the actual function of the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, like becoming more reactive, triggered, flashbacks, survival mode, like fight, flight, freeze, your memory, how you make decisions, even your medical and physical health, like muscle tension, chronic fatigue, IBS, fibromyalgia, frequent illness in general. So trauma is really impactful to the brain and body. And that is something that I think is extremely important to recognize in the perinatal population, because if we're talking about almost 50% that report it, we're talking about a lot of people. So that is, I think, is a big thing.
I feel like even just sitting here, like, I personally have not had a baby, but I'm like, oh, if I check off all those things, it's like, like we all have trauma probably to begin with in certain ways. And then, you know, the perinatal period can bring it out more or magnify it. So yes.
And here's my original caveat. You can get better.
Exactly.
You can get better. It feels really heavy and it feels really scary. Like all the information we've talked about is like, holy shit, why would I ever want to do this? Like, why would I ever want to have a baby? Because it doesn't always feel that way. That's the important thing to remember here. Like, we're talking about this conception to a year of life feels really heavy and really hard. If you get the support that you need and deserve, it does not, I am living proof. It does not always have to be that way. My clients are all the living proof that it does not have to always feel that way. You're not alone. It does not always have to be so heavy. And there's my original disclaimer caveat. And then you have like the jumping right back in, then you have like the birth traumas and the birth injuries, like epidural fails, wanting one and not getting one in time. You have the emergency C-sections, the intervention like forceps and vacuums. You have C-section scarring and healing if that's the route that you had to deliver. Birth injuries like bruises, broken bones, pelvic floor dysfunction, like pelvic organ prolapse, stress incontinence, fecal incontinence. So there's a lot that can go physically, you know, in terms of injury as well, which can obviously, brain and body, so they're so connected, impact your mental health. And then you have the aftermath of if you decide to breastfeed or chest feed. I could go into all that on the side as well. That could be a whole other thing, breastfeeding and mental health, but it can be really taxing. Research shows that I took a quote and I posted it to the side. It says, if you do the math, a year of breastfeeding equates to a conservative estimate of 1,800 hours of a mother's time. This isn't far off from a full-time job, considering that a 40-hour work week with 3 weeks of vacation comes in at 1960 hours of work time in a year. So just chest feeding, just breastfeeding full-time for a year is a full-time job, not recognizing that you also have most of the time a full-time job. So yeah, the mental health component of breastfeeding, I think, is also, really taxing, because those who want to but can't, those who can but don't want to, the shame and the stigma around all of that, the time that it takes. Do we live in a society that is breastfeeding friendly? That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
So taking into account all of this stuff that we've talked about is happening like while you're also taking care of a newborn.
Yeah. Well, we get the statistics too, where I forget what the actual number is, but it's like people who are having like stress incontinence at a certain point postpartum are more likely to then have like postpartum depression and all of that stuff. So
oh yes,
it goes hand in hand with like, all of that. And I feel like with a lot of our population and clientele, it's, any pelvic floor dysfunction that's affecting your bowels, bladder, and your sexual function, like that is a huge part of like life.
Your daily living.
Really
You're literally daily living
for a lot of people. And people are just told, and I'm sure it's like the same thing with mental health of like, it's like, oh, that's normal, or like that's just what happens when you have a baby. And so I feel like what you're saying with like, no, it can get better. We are always saying the same thing. Like, this does not have to be your life. And
right.
I think it's just so interesting how like what you do and what we do, like really kind of are so intertwined. And that's why
100%.
we're so happy to have someone like you
Yeah.
close by.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I feel the same way, obviously.
Yeah.
That's how I know you, because I came to pelvic floor therapy.
Yeah.
Like that is
phenomenal.
right. Because it's like, something is not right. I don't want to feel like this bizarre forever, this weird
Right.
forever. It's uncomfortable forever.
Yeah.
And you absolutely, there's an intersection there between mind and body.
Absolutely.
Right. So
And
like
I think
what you do helps mental health for sure.
Yeah.
right. And one of the things I think we do best is we approach, the pelvic floor, and the pelvic bowl as a space that has that emotional and energetic part of it as well. And yeah, we could go real clinical and be like 50 Kegels a day and all these different things. And we do that, like we throw that in, but at the same time, like we'll sit and sometimes, I'll just sit with my hands on somebody's pelvis and tears just flow. And we're not really touching anything or talking anything, but there's a space that like where the mind body collide. And then after that, like kind of, works through, I'll say, are you talking to somebody? Do you want to talk about this more? There's Maggie, there's this therapist, like all the things. So I think that is truly, and from your side too, if you're hearing, oh, this mama sustained a fistula or is leaking or all these things, it's that conversation back and forth that needs to be had that unfortunately, I think in the gynecological world, they don't have the time and the space and the energy to have those conversations. So it's us additional services that like we are helping everybody create those villages.
I find it so interesting that you say that, because something that I had looked at yesterday or the day before, I can't remember when, I was like really deep diving. I was reading about how like postpartum people and just like the general population thinks that like OBGYNs are responsible for like the screening of like PMADs.
Right.
But when you ask the OBGYNs, they don't think that they're the ones that are the most responsible for that. So it's like, if not them, then who? And like then who's doing it? Which is where like the gap, which is like where the gap is, right? It's like, it's like not everybody gets a screening. During the time of having a baby, when I had mine, it was COVID. They were going to just do it like telehealth. Like I've had friends, clients that had to do telehealth appointments. It's like, what? Like you have to look at my body, right? Like I have to make sure, like I would like to see somebody in person. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a lot. Again, you could go like really into it. But yeah, I mean, again, like with the right support, obviously it doesn't always have to be that way, and that there are providers. It's just that, if you think about it, I think the difficulty with the reaching out part is what we see in media about motherhood and postpartum. I mean, my husband, he watches the show Selling Sunset, right? It's like this, everybody's like, I don't know, selling houses in this $1 billion location. And there was a person on it who had given birth 3 weeks ago, and she came back into the office to get back to work. And she looked, she was stick thin, she was put together, makeup, hair done. And I'm like, what? First of all, my first thought was, I'm so sorry that you feel like you have to do that. You feel like you have to pull yourself together in such a way. And then there's the other side of me that's watching it, that like there are women or birthing people that are looking at this like, why didn't I look like this when I was 3 weeks postpartum? Why didn't I feel this going back to work in 7-inch stilettos or what, whatever. And it's unfortunate, because that is what it has to be for her job and in that area, which she does on Netflix, whatever. But also there are people that are watching it are not those people. The people that are watching it are like, well, what the heck is wrong with me? And I think a large part of it is media is like, there's a lot of shame in reaching out for help and a lot of stigma attached behind that. And we kind of do glorify pregnancy and motherhood and, parenthood and all that stuff. And we don't really leave the room, which is why that's what I really want to talk about is like, if you feel this way, if it feels this heavy and this hard, you're not alone. You're not a crazy person just because you're seeing in the media, not that. You're seeing all of like, oh, this is how beautiful it is. This is how much fun I'm having. And look at my postpartum body. And we're doing all these adventures and vacations. And you're like, I can't even get out of bed, so you're not alone. So I know we're coming up to time. So let's just get to risk factors. So just to be aware that if you have a previous mental health disorder or a previous diagnosis, or you struggle with your mental health before becoming pregnant, your risk factors for the perinatal period go up. So in my mind, it's like, again, being proactive instead of reactive, maybe reaching out for support before that even happens. I have clients that I see that come to me when they're like, hey, I'm thinking about having a baby. And I want to talk about what that might look like for me as someone who struggles already with anxiety or what have you. Family history of mental health, lack of support, substance use, like those kinds of things are more of the risk factors. And then when to seek help and what to do for treatment. So I am not conservative in terms of when to seek help. I say go immediately, whenever you can, whenever you think about it. I know that's come from a place of privilege, again, and access. However, if you can do it, go reach out, or even have something set up again, like before you give birth, if possible. There is no shame. Therapy, I believe, is always helpful. I think the same thing with pelvic floor. Go before you even are thinking about it.
Who should go to pelvic floor therapy? I'm like, anyone with a pelvis, which is everyone.
So true.
Right. Anyone with I totally agree. And I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to my clients about pelvic floor physical therapy.
Yeah.
Because the normalization of, oh, I peed a little when I jumped, or the normalization of like, oh my God, ha ha ha, every time I cough, I pee. Like, I'm like, you don't have to. You don't have to. I know that we've like joked about it, and but it can be very distressing, I think.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be funny.
I think the jokes are how we like cope.
Yeah.
It's like
100%.
But like inside you're like dying. But if you
Right.
make light of it, and maybe it helps people, you know, but
Yep, exactly. So there are treatments, obviously, for all of this, for all the PMAD struggles. So my big thing is like to try to set up a team. I know that there are doulas, birth centers, midwives, pelvic floor therapists, mental health professionals. There are ways to go around like doing different kinds of treatment, like CBT. I don't want to get into all the jargon, but there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's emotion response prevention, which helps with the OCD piece. There's couples therapy, because that's a whole other thing we could talk about, is just having the support in your relationship, or if you are in a relationship, if you're not, what happens there. There's postpartum resentment, there's rage, there's so much we can go into. And there's so many trauma-focused, trauma-informed therapies that can help with any kind of birth trauma. There are things called like birth affirmations, ways to try to like, talk yourself up when you're going through this experience, and just trying to set up a good team. They are out there. Hello, here's 3 of us. They are out there. They exist. They're just not in your face. So you do have to do a little bit of digging. So I have like a list of resources. Do you want to just like rattle off these websites, or do you want to like,
you know what, you can definitely, I think we might have some of them. If we don't have some of them, we'll add that to like your video, text, and all of that. If you want to rattle off a few, just for anybody who's just listening versus like reading or watching, that would be great.
Yep. So I'm trained by Postpartum Support International. So that's postpartum.net. And they have a ton of resources. You can find PMHCs, which are perinatal mental health counselors that specialize in exactly what I'm talking about. And you can find them within your area. I think you can just type in your zip code. There's psychologytoday.com and therapyden.com. Both of those you can, they're like little specifiers. You can click like motherhood, parenthood, postpartum, that kind of stuff, where you can find therapists in your area that specialize in that. You can ask your OBGYN. They should have a list of resources to just be able to give to you, your primary care physician, the back of your insurance card you can call, good old Dr. Google, and wonderfully enough, social media. There are, like, I'm on social media, and there are social media therapists on social media who post a ton of resources and support for postpartum. Perinatal, I should say. And one last thing, for those who can't afford or who need more financial friendly options, there is a website called Open Path Collective. And that website allows you to kind of find resources that fit into what you can afford, fit into your budget. So I think that's also really important. But again, I can send all that to you.
Send them.
Send them our way. We'll add it to this. It'll be in, the YouTube information. It'll be, in our monthly emails that go out. So if you're not part of that, check out our website, breathelifept.com. And of course, Maggie's lovely information, who is definitely becoming an influencer.
Oh my gosh, so humble. She's like, I'm on social media. I'm like, Maggie, you're an influencer.
Stop.
We're like, you go, girl.
Yeah. So my social media is like general mental health, because I just think, all of it, I think, is extremely, it's still relatable, obviously, to perinatal, because I talk a lot about trauma, depression, anxiety, and all that kind of stuff. And I just think that there's in general such a stigma around mental health still, unfortunately. And so for me, yeah, that's what I do on social media. I'm just constantly, making sure to get the information out there, to normalize it, Oh yeah, thank you. I do draw. I draw all my posts are mental health drawings. And I try to be informative, and normalizing and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to share your website, Maggie? Your website and your social handle?
Yeah.
Yep. So my website is www.therapywithmaggieLPC.com. And then all my social media handles are at therapywithmaggieLPC.
Okay.
I think it's TikTok and Instagram. That's where I'm most active. Well, thank you so much. I hope I covered everything.
Yeah, I know. We were just saying before how we're going to have part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
It would be a really cool series to do. But I think that, just what you were saying of like normalizing things and just allowing people to know that there like is help out there. And I just love your, kind of mantra there, like you can get better, like and that's like us. We're always saying like this is just a part of the path, like you're going to keep walking that path and moving forward. So
and one more caveat before we end is just there are so many beautiful things about parenthood and so many beautiful things about motherhood. And just to leave you with a little nugget, recognizing the word and not the word but, that you can feel both so grateful and so happy and so much joy to have your child, and also really stressed and really sad and really anxious and all those things. It can all be true at once. It doesn't have to be either or. I think that kind of gets lost in the language as well. Like, just be grateful. I am grateful. I am very grateful for all that I have. My child, I love her so much. She's everything. And I'm really stressed out at the same time. So like, just recognizing that, human emotion is complex. You don't ever feel just one thing at a time, and that's normal. That's okay. That's okay. And, there is support out there.
There is.
Well, thank you
so much, Maggie, for taking the time
to
talk with us.
I appreciate